In the summer of 1945, when Japan emerged from the smoke of war, its cities looked like torn cloth. The nation's fabric, literal and symbolic, was in tatters, streets littered with rubble, families displaced, material goods scarce. Yet where industries had collapsed, resourcefulness bloomed. And out of that necessity, the story of Japanese fashion in the 1950s began. At first, there was almost nothing to wear. Clothing rationing had erased luxury, and most citizens relied on whatever they could salvage. Khaki uniforms, mendable cottons, or unbleached mampe work pants once worn by women in rural factories. Tailors unstitched old garments, flipped faded linings, and stitched them anew. In this frugality, the people found not shame, but survival. By 1946, imported American cloth began trickling into the black markets of Shinjuku and Osaka. Parachute silk became blouses, army blankets metamorphosed into coats. The monpe and kimono, once daily life staples, coexisted with a new curiosity: Western suits, pleated skirts, and ready-made shirts circulating among returning soldiers, occupation staff, and traders. Under American occupation, fashion was both foreign and fascinating. Seen in magazines distributed by the Allied forces, glamorous images of Western women, waist-cinched dresses, neat gloves, high heels, spread a vision of confidence and abundance far removed from Japan's reality. Still, Japanese women noticed. They stared at seams and silhouettes, quietly studying the shape of the new world. As Tokyo's streets cleared and rationing eased around 1949, clothing became symbolic of renewal. Manufacturers who once made uniforms shifted to civilian textiles. Cotton mills reopened, dye houses revived vivid pigments long concealed by wartime austerity. Tailor shops multiplied. The hum of sewing machines became the soundtrack of recovery. Young women entering the workforce chose Western-style clothing, seeking practicality and individuality over traditional restraint. The kimono endured for ceremonies and memory, but the daily uniform of post-war femininity was transforming. Skirts grew to mid-calf length, blouses tucked neat and crisp, inspired by the silhouettes from Hollywood films imported by the occupation authorities. The cinema acted as a second ministry of fashion. Posters of Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, and Elizabeth Taylor decorated department stores like Ito Yokado and Mitsukoshi. Western styles, filtered through Japanese sensibility, spawned hybrid designs. The dress kimono, blending obi sashes with Western skirts. The sararīman, office suit, tailored narrower than its American counterpart to suit smaller frames and commuter life. Through the hum of trams and the rise of department stores, fashion's meaning deepened. To buy a coat wasn't merely to stay warm, it was to participate in reconstruction, to wear evidence of optimism stitched in wool. Every hemline became a measure of progress. Even the government understood clothing's power. Post-war national policy encouraged textile export as the foundation of economic recovery. Factories produced silk and cotton both for domestic markets and for sale abroad, especially to the United States. In 1950, textile exports accounted for more than one-third of Japan's foreign earnings. As foreign demand increased, quality improved. That improvement loop pulled domestic fashion forward. Better fabrics meant better tailoring, and better tailoring meant pride. But beneath the modernization, tradition persisted quietly in the home. Many women still owned a small collection of kimono, heirlooms, or post-war purchases woven in muted colors. These garments carried emotional currency. Even when Western dresses became weekly wear, the kimono remained the robe of dignity, worn for weddings, festivals, and moments when one wished to feel the weight of ancestry. Cultural commentators of the 1950s, like novelist Junichiro Tanizaki, mused on the tension between light and shadow, old and new. In clothing, this tension was visible every morning on Tokyo's commuter trains. A businessman in a Western suit reading a newspaper beside a grandmother in Monsuki kimono clutching her woven handbag. The decade was an intersection, not a replacement. By the early 1950s, public spaces reflected rhythm and color again. Ginza's shop fronts displayed mannequins in sharp suits and flared skirts. Schoolgirls exchanged patterns they discovered in glossy publications such as Fujin Gaho, Ladies Pictorial, and Shufu no Tomo, Housewife's Friend. Sewing at home became both necessity and hobby. Mothers taught daughters to draft patterns on old rice paper. Singer sewing machines, symbols of modern domesticity, were proudly displayed in living rooms. The ideal image of femininity also evolved under these influences. The modern girl, or moden garu of the pre-war decade, reappeared, this time tempered by modesty and domestic virtue instead of rebellion. Her hair was shorter, curled, and managed. She carried a handbag instead of a pipe. Where the 1920s version had provoked cultural anxiety, the 1950s version embodied renewal. She was the woman who could bridge tradition and modernity without betraying either. Men's fashion, too, evolved quickly. Demobilized soldiers and emerging salarymen adopted Western suits as symbols of respectability. The gray flannel suit became a badge of belonging to the new corporate Japan. Neckties, narrower than American ones, colored offices with subdued patterns, while leather shoes, once rare, became the standard. Yet on weekends, traditional yukata robes resurfaced at home or during festivals, marking retreat into familiar rhythms. By mid-decade, the transformation was undeniable. The first Japanese fashion magazines focusing solely on modern dressing appeared. Movie studios, led by Toho and Shochiku, collaborated with brands to showcase clothing on screen. If American culture had introduced Western garments, Japanese design had begun internalizing and refining them, creating styles that spoke to both worlds. The 1950s Japanese wardrobe thus became a dialogue: practicality versus memory, imported aspiration versus native restraint. And all those seams stitched a nation together. Every cuff folded in tailor's light, and every kimono sleeve pressed into tatami rooms carried the same unspoken hope that Japan could look at itself again and recognize something dignified, even beautiful, in the mirror. As the decade's first half closed, the country's streets no longer looked gray. Factory chimneys rose, shopkeepers smiled, fabrics colored with optimism. From devastation's dust, Japan was learning to dress for the future. The year is 1953. Tokyo hums with rebuilding cranes, neon signs, and the metallic squeal of trolley lines. Amid that clatter, a new figure marches daily through Shimbashi Station, briefcase in hand, hat brimmed down against drizzle. The sararīman, the salaryman. His uniform, a modest Western suit, will become the visual shorthand of modern Japan. His look seems simple. Gray or navy single-breasted suit, crisp white shirt, plain tie, but its symbolism is profound. For a nation reinventing itself as a democracy anchored in corporate growth, conformity was stability. The salaryman's attire echoed the collective ethos. Neatness, order, and diligence were virtues now sewn onto lapels. Clothing availability improved rapidly after the Korean War began in 1950, when U.S. military procurement orders boosted Japan's textile industry. Wool and cotton imports surged. Tailors thrived across Ginza, Osaka, and Nagoya, measuring an eager generation that equated a good fit with a good future. Even department stores began offering affordable ready-made suits, democratizing dignity for clerks and junior executives. Yet modest as these suits were, they bore subtle distinctions. Older executives preferred boxy American cuts. Younger graduates, admiring British tailoring, favored slimmer shoulders and higher armholes. A hat, often a fedora, completed the ensemble until late in the decade when commuters, tired of crowded trains crushing brims, abandoned hats altogether. Office life itself changed wardrobe habits. 5-day weeks spread, and daily commuting demanded resilience in fabric. Synthetic fibers such as rayon entered production, promising cheaper, easier maintenance than wool, an innovation that signaled both modern science and middle-class aspiration. Cleanliness became code for reliability, a pressed trouser crease, professionalism. While men's fashion codified discipline, women's fashion negotiated liberation. The surge of women joining offices as typists, telephone operators, and retail clerks created a new consumer class with disposable income, and with it, the concept of weekday elegance. Their attire balanced Western practicality with Japanese refinement, tailored pencil skirts, soft blouses with Peter Pan collars, sometimes paired with cardigans modeled after American actress sweaters. Hosiery shortages had eased. Nylons imported through black markets now sold legally, gleaming on city sidewalks like subtle declarations of modern womanhood. Outside office towers, leisure was returning to life. Department store rooftops offered beer gardens and miniature parks where couples on dates showcased their best looks. For men, a short-sleeved, open-collar shirt tucked into high-waisted trousers marked sophistication without extravagance. For women, florals in rayon or thin cotton replaced the once austere wartime palette. Pastels whispered optimism. Magazines like Josei Jishin and Fujin Koron guided readers through etiquette and style columns. Advertisements showed smiling housewives modeling new domestic ideals. Western dresses matched with pearls, symbolizing both prosperity and disciplined virtue. The crossover between home and work clothing compressed. The same neat blouse might serve in the office and later at dinner. In that economy of wardrobe, we glimpsed the practicality shaping Japan's middle class. But the kimono never vanished. It retreated, dignified, into the space of celebration. Weddings, New Year's visits, and children's milestones kept traditional garments alive. Textile artisans in Kyoto and Kanazawa revived luxury silks such as chiramen and rinzu, marketing them as heirloom investments for a nation regaining wealth. Photographers captured brides in white shiramuku robes emerging from gleaming imported limousines, an image of fusion. Tradition escorted by modern power. Meanwhile, men's casual wear experimented with American influence. Military surplus jackets, Hawaiian shirts, and denim jeans began appearing among youth groups dubbed Taiyozoku, the Sun Tribe, inspired by Shintaro Ishihara's controversial 1955 novel Season of the Sun. These rebellious teenagers, seen racing scooters along the coast, scandalized elders but heralded the coming socio-cultural shift. Through them, Japan glimpsed its first true youth fashion movement, one that prized leisure and individuality over hierarchy. Every garment of 1950s Japan balanced two vectors: collective respectability and private expression. The salaryman's tie knot, the typist's bracelet, even a student's rolled-up sleeves, each made a quiet negotiation between tradition's restraint and modern life's pace. It was fashion as diplomacy within oneself. By 1958, the country hosted international exhibitions showcasing industrial design and textiles, signaling entry into the global economy it had once feared. Clothes mirrored that confidence. Synthetic fabrics now carried Japanese brand names, Toray, Teijin. The phrase "made in Japan" began changing from shameful to sought after. As the decade neared its close, the national silhouette stood unmistakable. Men in suits, women in dresses, yet both forms imbued with subtle Japanese proportion, politeness made visible. Tokyo evenings glittered with neon reflections on polished shoes, soft pastel prints swaying beside them. In train windows, commuters caught their own reflections and, perhaps without noticing, saw a modern society that had stitched itself together through the ordinary miracle of getting dressed. The morning chorus of 1950s. Tokyo was not birdsong, it was the rhythm of sewing machines. In countless apartments, young women bent over patterns trimmed from magazines, tracing their futures in chalk lines on fabric. What they stitched wasn't only clothing, it was modern identity. Post-war reconstruction had altered the meaning of womanhood. During the war, women worked in munitions, factories, and farms. In peacetime, many wished for refinement without returning to confinement. Clothing became the negotiation between duty and dream. Department stores understood this early. Mitsukoshi, Takashimaya, and Matsuzakaya didn't merely sell dresses, they curated aspiration. The mannequins on display windows modeled not just garments, but lifestyles. An apartment with electric appliances, mink-collared coats, and endless optimism. Advertising caught the new tone. Instead of wartime slogans of sacrifice, posters now read of brightness and cleanliness. The word modern became both adjective and prayer. The archetype of the era was the Ryosai Kenbo, the good wife, wise mother. Yet within that respectable framework, women reinterpreted beauty. Skirts lengthened slightly from American fashions to match Japanese modesty, while waistlines still cinched tightly to highlight domestic grace. Textile manufacturers created floral prints with muted charm, pinks softened by gray undertones, blues that remembered indigo. Even synthetic fibers like rayon or acetate were woven to mimic hand-dyed silk, allowing elegance for every budget. Home sewing blurred class divisions. Radio programs taught listeners how to cut patterns. Magazines printed diagrams next to recipes. A clever homemaker could, with a few meters of fabric, rival department store fashion. This DIY culture sustained a uniquely Japanese balance between collective trends and individual craft. When a neighbor wore a similar dress, the difference lay in the choice of pattern or lace, small, personal acts of creativity hidden in conformity. Film amplified these shifts. The cinema was arguably Japan's most influential runway. Directors like Yasujiro Ozu and Mikio Naruse framed women's clothing as character language. In Late Spring or Repast, the camera lingered on a silk collar or a plain apron, revealing the tension between tradition and independence. The 1954 global success of Seven Samurai even inspired masculine utility wear, simple indigo jackets, reinterpreted by fashionable youth. Among actresses, Setsuko Hara and Hideko Takamine became style lodestars. Hara's restrained grace made the kimono respectable again, while Takamine's office attire in post-war melodramas mirrored the aspirations of working women nationwide. Newspapers reviewed their wardrobes as attentively as their performances. Costume designers became cultural translators. Through celluloid, viewers rehearsed progress. By the mid-1950s, Western cosmetics accompanied Western fashion. Revlon and Shiseido advertisements flooded magazines with smiling women sporting brighter lipstick and permed hair. Salons, once luxuries, multiplied in city districts. American perms met Japanese restraint, producing the poodle cut, and later the page boy. Styles manageable yet sophisticated. To appear well-groomed was moral accomplishment, proof that hardship had passed. Yet amid this polished optimism, subtle resistance flickered. Some intellectual women, inspired by Marxist or feminist circles at universities, rejected overt glamour as capitalist distraction. They preferred simple cotton dresses, unpainted faces, and sandals, echoing a spiritual continuity with the pre-war moga, modern girl, but grounded in new seriousness. For them, outward simplicity represented inward strength. This quiet descent added dimension to the fashion landscape, ensuring that the decade's elegance never hardened into uniformity. Outside metropolises, rural Japan absorbed trends more slowly, but not less meaningfully. Government rural improvement programs encouraged neat appearance as a sign of civic progress. Village tailors adapted city silhouettes to local fabrics. Indigo dyed cotton into flared skirts, hemp blends into blouses. Teachers and nurses, symbols of modern service, circulated between city and countryside, wearing Western attire with local patience. Thus, the language of dress linked distant regions in shared aspiration. The kimono world also experienced rejuvenation. Celebrated designer Chio Tanaka introduced simplified obi knots and washable artificial silks, allowing women to maintain traditional aesthetics compatible with modern life's hurry. Kimono patterns brightened again. Cherry blossoms, plum, cranes, no longer muted by wartime regulations. Wearing a kimono publicly now expressed optimism, not nostalgia. Perhaps the most charming illustration of this hybrid era arrived in 1956, when Life magazine photographers captured a Tokyo street scene. Two friends laughing, one in a Western suit dress, the other in a patterned kimono, both carrying identical handbags. The photo spoke more eloquently than any editorial. Japan's femininity had become plural. Clothing also mirrored generational dialogue within homes. Mothers raised in kimonos instructed daughters to walk gracefully and bow correctly, even in Western skirts. Elders often sewed the juban, the underkimono, from remnants to remind the younger generation that beneath modern cloth lay traditional modesty. Fashion thus preserved continuity through adaptation, not defiance. Economically, women's purchasing power reshaped commerce. The rapid success of domestic magazines, Fujin Seikatsu, Women's Life, Housewife's Note, proved that women directed household spending. The act of shopping itself became recreation, a soft symbol of empowerment. When a woman bought herself a new blouse, she wasn't only spending yen, she was voting for inclusion in modern Japan's narrative. By 1959, the year of Crown Prince Akihito's televised wedding, female fashion achieved full spectacle. The bride, Michiko Shota, later Empress Michiko, wore both Western gowns and a white shiromuku, fusing old and new before millions. Her gentle demeanor and refined Western education created the prototype for Japanese femininity into the 1960s, cultured, cosmopolitan, yet rooted. In those televised moments, Japanese women saw the synthesis completed. Silk and synthetics, sleeves long and short, traditions braided with progress. From the hum of domestic sewing machines to the glow of national television, the fashion of 1950s Japan had turned the trauma of rebuilding into the beauty of redefinition, one hem at a time. When we picture Japan in the 1950s, we often see bustling streets, neon signs, and new television antennas. But listen closely, and another soundtrack dominates: the rhythmic thunder of textile looms. Inside humid factory halls from Osaka to Yokohama, the nation rewove its destiny one thread at a time. Textiles were Japan's comeback engine. Before the war, silk had been the country's primary export, light, luxurious, and symbolic of artistry. After the devastation, silk could no longer clothe a starving nation. What people needed were durable, affordable, and modern fabrics. So the government and private sector turned their gaze to innovation. In the quiet of research labs, chemists in white coats started spinning futures out of synthetics. The early 1950s saw the rise of rayon, gleaming, inexpensive, and flexible. It wasn't perfect. It wrinkled easily, yet it democratized style. Women who once longed for pre-war silks could now buy rayon dresses shimmering under department store lights. Men found rayon ties crisp and affordable. Every bloom of rayon on shop racks reflected technological optimism. Two industrial giants, Toray, Toyo Rayon, and Teijin, Imperial Rayon, led this metamorphosis. Their scientists studied Western patents, adapting them to Japan's climate and production scale. Torai's factories in Ehime and Aichi became national symbols of renewal, where young engineers envisioned fibers as national salvation. Toray would later pioneer nylon in 1951 and, by decade's end, introduce polyester blends that resisted wrinkles, an everyday marvel in households still heated by charcoal stoves. By 1953, textile exports surpassed pre-war levels, largely due to Allied lifting of trade restrictions. Japanese cloth once again reached Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, and eventually the Western market. The phrase "made in Japan," still met with suspicion after the war, gradually came to mean ingenious, dependable, and affordable. Cloth, ironically, rehabilitated reputation faster than diplomacy could. At street level, this industrial success transformed fashion norms. Fabric availability expanded design imagination. Patterned cottons that had disappeared in wartime returned with color exuberance. Plaids, florals, geometric prints echoing both kimono motifs and foreign trends. Tailors could finally satisfy the public's hunger for expression rather than just function. Sewing machine ownership became a key household indicator of progress. By the mid-1950s, an estimated 1 in 3 urban homes owned a Singer or Japanese-made brother machine. Housewives, once stitching by hand, now mastered speed. The clatter of the foot pedal was as familiar as children's laughter, an everyday proof of technological democracy. Parallel to domestic production, international collaboration spurred textile quality. Encouraged by export incentives, industry associations launched design competitions blending traditional Japanese motifs with Western styling, birthing what we might call modern wo. Furoshiki wrapping cloths sported atomic age patterns. Yukata cottons carried abstract prints inspired by Bauhaus art. The conservative public may not have fully adopted avant-garde designs, but the experimentation signaled confidence to innovate rather than merely imitate. Government vision reinforced the trend. Economic officials identified textiles as both a training ground and a launching pad for broader industrial modernization. Through the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, policies supported retooling of spinning equipment, adopting automated looms, and promoting technical training for young women workers. Entire communities grew around mills, dormitories, cafeterias, social clubs, creating a new working-class culture that blended discipline with aspiration. A neat uniform meant inclusion in the nation's progress. The human side of this boom carried complexity. Women formed the backbone of factory labor, often teenagers from rural villages seeking wages to send home. Their uniforms symbolized both empowerment and endurance. Blue drill cotton tunics with matching caps and white scarves for hygiene. Official propaganda called them factory daughters of post-war Japan. Their photographs appeared in newspapers with smiling faces, though the long shifts and strict supervision echoed older disciplines. Still, wages granted independence. Many saved to fund education or urban marriages. In every checked smock, a modest revolution stitched quietly. Culturally, new fibers changed taste. Nylon stockings replaced scarce silk ones, offering sheen and elasticity that women adored. Wash-and-wear blouses liberated busy homemakers from ironing piles. A small but meaningful freedom. Posters depicted women joyfully pulling such garments from washing machines, the slogan proclaiming, "No ironing, more living." In that domestic promise glowed Japan's deeper modernization. Time itself became a luxury to be regained through chemistry and design. Design schools responded to these currents. The Bunka Fashion College in Tokyo, already established before the war, entered its golden age under instructors who linked Paris couture schooling with Japanese craftsmanship. Students like a young Kenzo Takada, who would later conquer Paris, absorbed techniques of pattern making while studying the psychology of modern taste. Their training grounds were laboratories for the next global chapter. Even rural artisans adapted. Traditional dyers in Kyoto began experimenting with chemical dyes to stabilize brighter hues for export markets. Nara and Fukushima weavers mixed rayon threads into silk to create hybrid textiles, affordable elegance bridging two eras. The vocabulary of fashion expanded to include not only kimono and dress, but also blend. By 1958, trade fairs turned textile production into spectacle. Visitors at Tokyo's Harumi Exhibition Hall wandered between bolts of shimmering synthetics displayed like futuristic art. They touched smooth polyester and marveled, a fabric that barely wrinkled even after folding. For a country still haunted by wartime scarcity, abundance now felt tangible, almost miraculous. Yet amid progress, nostalgia whispered. Elder artisans lamented homogenization, the loss of the slow hand. Was mechanized perfection eroding the spirit of wabi-sabi? Beauty in imperfection? Perhaps. But others believed the new age demanded speed to survive. Post-war Japan was learning to balance efficiency with elegance, a duality still defining its design ethos today. As the decade closed, the loom's steady pulse matched that of the nation itself, rhythmic, determined, forward. From devastated silence to industrial symphony, Japan in the 1950s rediscovered identity through innovation. Threads became metaphors, each fiber tightly bound, resilient, collectively strong. Clothing no longer merely covered bodies, it clothed ambition. By the mid-1950s, Tokyo's air vibrated with an unfamiliar confidence. Factories thundered, students flooded universities, and a whole generation born during or just after the war was stepping onto streets that finally belonged to them. These young Japanese would turn the nation's sidewalks into living catwalks, where self-expression met reconstruction. At the heart of this transformation beat Shinjuku. Its cafes filled with students in narrow trousers and open-collar shirts, sketching, debating, and smoking beneath posters announcing new European films. Across the city, American rock and roll records slipped through import shops, and local jazz bands electrified night spots in Ginza. The influence on fashion arrived almost instantly. Young men began rolling up shirt sleeves like James Dean. Their collars slightly rebellious. Leather jackets, rare and expensive, became treasured symbols of non-conformity. For young women, cinema offered endless cues. Movie houses screened Hollywood blockbusters alongside domestic productions by Ozu, Naruse, and Kurosawa. Western actresses projected liberation. Japanese actresses translated that into subtle poise. Grace Kelly's neat pastel suits inspired tailored two-piece ensembles nicknamed Grace Style, while Audrey Hepburn's capri pants found their echo in home-sewn imitations seen near university campuses. Local celebrities magnified the craze. Singer Chami Eri, dubbed one of the three sisters of post-war pop, performed in dresses brighter than anything audiences had seen since the 1930s. Her sequined stage gowns, copied in department store approximations, sold within days. Television, newly entering living rooms, reinforced these desires. Even families who couldn't afford such outfits watched and dreamed. Fashion now traveled on radio waves and cathode rays. Photographs from the era reveal how rapidly the youth aesthetic diverged from their parents. The The sharp suits of salarymen and the careful kimonos of mothers looked conservative next to vibrant student crowds. When Taiyozoku, the Sun Tribe, appeared in films and magazines with windswept hair and bold shirts, the elders fretted. Yet for many youths, those images symbolized a freedom promised but never experienced. They were determined to live visibly in a country learning confidence again. Cafes and dance halls offered spaces for that expression. On weekend nights, girls in full skirts twirled to swing and early rock tunes, their petticoats rustling like applause. Imported fabrics were beyond most budgets, so inventive dressmakers recreated Western silhouettes with local cottons, starching them heavily to achieve volume. A typical outfit comprised a circular skirt, short-sleeved blouse, buttoned cardigan, and kitten heels, each piece sewn with care, as if optimism itself required perfect stitching. In smaller towns, adaptation took distinct forms. Young men working in new factories or studying at teachers' colleges combined practical attire with flashes of Western flair. Checked work shirts, rolled jeans, rubber-soled loafers. Street photographers documented them lingering beside jukeboxes or loading trucks, proof that style was no longer limited to Ginza's polished avenues. Magazines dedicated to youth, such as Haibon Punch and later Men's Club, crystallized the first clearly defined youth subcultures. Pages shone with black and white photographs of college fashion clubs that debated cuff widths as passionately as politics. The idea of trend as continuous seasonal excitement was foreign before the war. Now, with photography and advertising flourishing, fashion became a conversation unfolding in real time. Meanwhile, television dramas and films exported another vision, the rebirth of everyday fashion as a collective performance. Costume designers collaborating with advertising agencies realized that a single on-screen look could trigger national demand. In that sense, cinema replaced Paris. Shochiku Studios' romantic melodramas set in modern Tokyo apartments presented heroines wearing polished but attainable fashion, pleated skirts, slim belts, hairbands. Viewers didn't idolize them from distance, they copied them. Yet for every polished style there was resistance. Late-decade students influenced by leftist movements adopted simpler worker-like clothing, denim jackets, sneakers, and dark trousers, rejecting consumer glamour. The same decade that produced rockabilly hairstyles also birthed campus activism attire. Street fashion was not just color and cut, but also conviction. The economic boom produced shopping rituals new to Japan: the bargain sale, the seasonal clearance, the window display. Young people adopted the English word fashion itself, pronouncing it with cheerful precision, fashion, as a term signifying modern participation. Newspapers reported on crowds queuing to enter Ginza department stores during promotion events. Something as simple as buying a sweater became proof that Japan stood shoulder to shoulder with the modern world. Still, traces of tradition lingered in festival wear. At summer matsuri, teenage girls donned brightly dyed yukata robes, tying the obi shorter and lighter for comfort, pairing them with Western sandals. The hybrid aesthetic, woodblock florals meeting synthetic fabrics, summed up the decade's paradox: reverence without stagnation, music two-colored style. Jazz musicians in Yokohama's clubs wore trim suits with narrow ties, channeling American cool, filtered through Japanese precision. Fans emulated them, forming small cliques complete with local slang: Mike, Bopu, Tsu. Clothing gave them code names and collective identity. By 1959, the youth silhouette had stabilized. Men with tidy pompadours, smart trousers, short-sleeved shirts, women with curled bobs, knee-length skirts, and handbags swinging with confidence. The resulting visual energy signaled Japan's final step out of austerity. Walking through Shibuya or Osaka's Namba district then was like witnessing choreography, thousands moving in sync, each stride an act of rebirth. In photographs from that year, the twilight of the decade, the fashion narrative comes full circle. A boy leans on his motorbike, hair shining with pomade. A girl nearby adjusts her pearl earrings, her rayon skirt catching the wind. Neon signs flicker Coca-Cola overhead, yet in their poise, something utterly Japanese remains: the timeless grace of balance. The streets themselves had become mirrors, reflecting a nation in motion. Fashion no longer flowed solely from ateliers or factories. It moved through laughter, music, and friendship. Japan in the 1950s had taught its youth that style was not about owning abundance, but about inhabiting possibility. Amid the whirl of modern suits and cotton skirts that filled Japan's 1950s cityscapes, one silhouette persisted: the kimono. It moved differently, slower, quieter. Its folds carried the cadence of centuries, even as the country rushed toward neon modernity. To understand post-war Japan, we must watch how the kimono refused extinction, instead transforming gracefully to survive. At war's end, the kimono symbolized both comfort and the past. During the hardship years, women repurposed kimono fabric into children's clothes or blankets. Silk bolts, once heirlooms, were traded on black markets for rice. By the early 1950s, that legacy fabric began reappearing, washed, remade, reinvented. Old kimono were resized into shorter versions to match urban life. Sleeves were narrowed for practicality. Every alteration was less an abandonment than a conversation between austerity and beauty. Culturally, Japan balanced reverence for way, harmony, with fascination for the West. This duality shaped the kimono's next act. In big cities, its everyday presence declined, but it remained an anchor for identity. Shops in Kyoto's Nishijin district resumed silk weaving, this time with brighter, more daring dyes thanks to new chemical techniques. Patterns modernized. Instead of the somber browns of the 1940s, women embraced turquoise, rose, and sunshine yellow. These colors echoed optimism whispered through the whole economy. The furisode, with its long flowing sleeves traditionally worn by unmarried women, regained popularity as morale lifted. Department stores dedicated entire floors to wedding trousseau, furisode, obi belts, hair ornaments, all marketed as symbols of rejuvenated womanhood. At the same time, clever tailors introduced hybrids such as the two-part kimono, a skirt and top sewn separately for ease of wear, secretly fastened with zippers. Housewives appreciated the convenience. Tradition yielded slightly. Practicality triumphed quietly. Textile innovation, especially synthetic silk, transformed accessibility. Rayon and acetate blends imitated the shimmer of real silk without the cost. These fabrics could be machine washed, a major selling point in households newly equipped with electric washing machines. Advertisements touted modern tradition, assuring customers they could preserve heritage without endless hand-washing. The kimono thus migrated from ceremonial garment to something many could again afford. In rural areas, kimono never truly left. Farmers' wives still wore simple indigo-dyed cotton varieties for work, crossing the tails tightly around the waist and tying aprons over them. Come festival season, they reached for brighter ones stored in cedar chests. Photographs from Tohoku villages show groups of women celebrating harvest dances in matching yukata robes, cheap to produce, cheerful to wear, a reminder that beauty survived scarcity. The obi belt, always key to a kimono's personality, also received updates. New metallic threads and pre-tied forms, known as tsukisage obi, helped novices achieve elegance without mastery. Manufacturers produced illustrated manuals detailing quick wrapping techniques. The skill once passed down over decades could now be learned in a weekend, a small democratization of grace. Television played its part. Costume dramas set in the Edo period filled screens with flowing silk splendor, rekindling affection for the garment in homes where daughters knew only dresses. When NHK broadcast instructions on traditional manners, the presenters wore kimonos, signaling authority and continuity. Politicians' wives often posed for official portraits in restrained tome-sewed robes, delicate crests on deep black, embodying dignity within the new democracy. In high fashion, designers imagined kimono through modern eyes. In 1955, the Japan Fashion Council initiated exhibitions pairing traditional fabrics with Western tailoring. Models strutted in gowns featuring kimono sleeves or obi-inspired belts, showing that history could complement high heels. These experiments hinted at the coming fusion decades later, when designers like Hanai Mori would conquer Paris with the flutter of butterfly-printed silk. The kimono also became Japan's most eloquent export image. As international trade fairs drew crowds to Tokyo, hostesses known as kimono girls greeted visitors in flawlessly folded robes, their appearance choreographed to signify refinement beneath modern progress. Photographs of these ambassadors circulated abroad and at home, reassuring a domestic audience that modernization had not erased essence. Among the public, however, emotion toward the kimono remained complex. Many older women mourned what daily convenience demanded. They missed the rustle of silk and the slow ritual of tying the obi, a rhythm replaced by zippers. Younger women, meanwhile, relished the freedoms Western clothes allowed: movement speed, pockets. Yet when graduation ceremonies or weddings arrived, the kimono returned from storage, its scent of camphor and cedar awakening collective memory. Commercially, renting perfected this compromise. Shops offered borrowed elegance for special events, a brilliant system that preserved craftsmanship while accommodating new economics. Generations still learned how the left overlap must always be worn over the right, signifying life. Such details endured like moral lessons stitched into cloth. In the final years of the decade, the garment achieved renewed prestige through imperial symbolism. When Crown Prince Akihito married Michiko Shota in 1959, their official portraits alternated between Western wedding attire and classic courtly kimono. For millions watching, the message was clear. The new Japan could face the world modernly clothed, yet traditionally grounded. Sales of formal kimono soared. Apprentice geisha registrations in Kyoto rose again. Needlework classes filled with young enthusiasts eager to learn the old methods, albeit with synthetic thread. Thus, the 1950s kimono stood neither as relic nor as rebellion. It evolved. Like Japan itself, it wove compromise into art. Each stitch said that tradition could adapt without surrender, that identity could survive translation. The garment's dignity, like the country's, lay in its quiet resilience, ready to fold itself neatly, but never to disappear. By the late 1950s, Japan had not only rebuilt its cities, it was carefully tailoring its global image. In conference halls, trade fairs, and international expos, the nation presented itself through technology, etiquette, and perhaps most memorably, textiles. Fashion became diplomacy by fabric, every wrinkle pressed with intent. The decade's latter half was a time of strategic exhibition. Only a dozen years earlier, Japan had been the site of ashes and occupation. Now it was determined to appear industrious, peaceful, and elegant. While engineers developed cars and cameras for export, designers and garment manufacturers spun a subtler narrative that Japanese artistry had evolved, not vanished. Clothing was the most immediate ambassador. Textile trade missions led by the Ministry of International Trade and Industry sailed regularly to Europe and America. Delegates carried trunks bursting with swatches, silk blends, rayon scarves, embroidered blouses. Western buyers marveled at the precision of Japanese craftsmanship married to modern efficiency. Orders followed by the thousands. Some American department stores even hosted Japan Weeks, where staff wore kimonos and showcased home goods beside mannequins dressed in Tokyo tailoring. For the first time since the 1930s, Japanese fashion was desirable abroad rather than merely imitative. At home, such recognition triggered pride. Newspapers reported when a Kyoto silk found placement in a Paris boutique, or when British designers praised Japanese crepe. These victories reassured a population still learning to trust itself. The export economy wasn't abstract. It lived in postcards of models smiling under foreign flags, in tiny made-in-Japan tags hidden inside suits, selling halfway around the world. Fashion shows transformed into full cultural statements. The 1957 Japanese Fashion Exhibition in Los Angeles drew headlines for its fusion of East and West. Models glided across runways wearing ensembles designed by Chio Tanaka and Asahi Onuma, streamlined suits trimmed with kimono fabric belts, evening gowns cut from hand-painted Yuzen silk. Reviewers called the show unexpectedly modern. For organizers, the complement was perfect, a balance of innovation and heritage, exactly the hybrid Japan wanted the world to see. Domestic audiences sensed the shift too. Magazines featured foreign coverage alongside local editorials, placing Dior's new look opposite kimono revival pieces. Fashion schools encouraged bilingual studies, teaching both French seam terminology and Japanese dyeing tradition. The message was subtle but firm. Japan belonged in global couture conversations. Behind each glamorous display stood quiet industrial labor. Textile factories in Toyama, Fukui, and Shiga adapted to international standards, installing automatic looms that rivaled European counterparts. Export inspection centers tested every batch. Quality control itself became a national pride. Workers saw their effort mirrored in glossy photos of sophisticated Tokyo runways. Their expertise, once hidden under soot, had turned into soft power. Tourism intertwined naturally with this renaissance. As the government promoted cultural diplomacy, kimono-clad hostesses appeared at airports and international fairs, smiling under banners that promised friendly Japan. Their attire was meticulously curated, neither too ornate nor provincial, signaling composition and courtesy. For foreign visitors, these images became shorthand for refinement. Back home, they reinforced a message of unity. Dressing well was part of nation branding. Western influence, however, flowed both directions. Japanese youth continued to consume Hollywood glamour, jazz, and European chic. Magazines imported photographic spreads from Vogue and Elle, while domestic editors contextualized them alongside local trends. Instead of blind copying, designers began selective translation. A Christian Dior silhouette might reappear in Nagoya as a modest day dress with shorter sleeves and higher necklines, tailored for Japanese sensibilities. This process of adaptation, of filtering global fashion through the sieve of cultural nuance, became Japan's lasting strength. Economic realities also drove exchange. The rise of trading companies specializing in garments and accessories offered new forms of employment for women who served as merchandisers, translators, and export managers. These jobs required business attire echoing Western professionalism. Thus, the international look extended beyond aesthetics to women's empowerment, tailoring that represented participation in modern commerce. In cultural terms, fashion's globalization paralleled Japan's diplomacy of reassurance. Friendly, progressive imagery, smiling women, modern cities, helped soften foreign distrust still lingering from wartime memories. The kimono, once viewed abroad as an exotic artifact, now stood beside crisp suits and gleaming fabrics as proof that tradition and technology could coexist. Television enhanced this soft power. Viewers watched variety shows where pop singers performed in Western gowns before sets designed like city skylines. Costume changes were narrative devices. A singer starting in kimono might reappear minutes later in a cocktail dress, symbolizing evolution mid-song. Such visual metaphors reminded audiences that Japan could move seamlessly between eras. Cultural theorists of the time noticed the interplay between appearance and identity. Sociologist Shimizu Ikutaro wrote that to get dressed is to negotiate with modernity. For ordinary citizens, that negotiation became daily practice. Wearing a Western suit to work didn't reject tradition, it affirmed national progress. Choosing a kimono for New Year's didn't resist modernization, it celebrated continuity. Clothing thus functioned as peaceful diplomacy not only abroad, but within hearts. By 1959, anticipation of the coming decade's international events, the 1960 trade liberalization agreements, the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, already infused fashion with purpose. Designers prepared to represent Japan on a bigger stage, sketching garments that could travel across cultures without translation. They understood that every seam and color could articulate national character. Photographs from that year capture a confident synthesis. Men in tailored suits, under neon kirin signs, women in both Western dresses, and radiant komon kimonos crossing pedestrian bridges. The city looked cosmopolitan, yet unmistakably Japanese. The decade's final flourish came in that same year's imperial wedding. When cameras broadcast Michiko Shota's bridal procession worldwide, the sheer variety of formal wear among guests, kimono, Western gowns, uniforms, embodied Japan's successful reintegration into the global family. Fashion had done what politics alone could not, made reconciliation visible. Thus, by the close of the 1950s, clothing served as Japan's second diplomacy. Fabric spoke where treaties hesitated, and patterns replaced propaganda. The nation that had once been seen only through the lens of militarism now reappeared draped in textiles of civility. Japan had learned that to dress elegantly was to speak gently, and the world was finally listening. Every decade leaves behind costumes and photographs, but rare is the era that rewrites a nation's soul through its seams. Japan's 1950s did exactly that. From the hum of textile mills to the whisper of silk sleeves, the story of what people wore in those years became the story of how a country learned to believe in itself again. When historians describe the Japanese miracle, they often point to economic data, growth rates, exports, industrial output. Yet growth did not begin in boardrooms. It began in closets and on street corners. Clothing revealed what statistics could not. Optimism stitched into daily life. Each new blouse or freshly pressed suit carried faith that tomorrow might truly differ from yesterday. The tangible legacy is everywhere. Modern Tokyo professionals stepping through subway gates in perfectly tailored suits echo their 1950s predecessors, the first sararīman who turned discipline into fashion. Today's balance of uniformity and neat individuality comes from that post-war code: respect for the group, expression within harmony. Clothing still signals reliability through restraint, proof that culture once woven is hard to unpick. Women's fashion transformed even more lastingly. The confidence of 1950s office workers and homemakers redefined femininity for generations. Their insistence on both practicality and grace evolved into the minimalist precision and modest sophistication now recognized as quintessentially Japanese design. Brands like Hanai Mori, Rei Kawakubo, and Issey Miyake would decades later inherit that very duality: modern yet grounded, structured yet fluid. Their philosophies trace lineage to the seamstresses of the 1950s, who first balanced innovation with respect for the handmade. Textiles, too, carried forward a new relationship between science and beauty. The rayon and polyester breakthroughs of the 50s built the foundation for Japan's later dominance in high-tech fibers, the same research spirit that would yield cutting-edge materials used in space travel and sportswear. What began as a desperate search for cheap substitutes became the seed of a design revolution in which function itself became aesthetic. Importantly, the decade also changed how tradition survived. Instead of freezing the kimono in museums, Japan chose to let it evolve. That ethos, preservation through adaptation, still defines national artistry. Contemporary kimono brands using recycled fabrics or digital prints owe their philosophy to those 1950s innovators who quietly added zippers to robes and mixed synthetic silk with heritage dyes. In that audacious gentleness resides a cultural lesson. Tradition need not retreat. It can update its pattern. Globally, the 1950s established fashion as Japan's first form of soft power. Before electronics and automobiles conquered markets, fabric and apparel repaired the nation's image abroad. Western consumers who once mistrusted made-in-Japan labels discovered reliability in shirts, scarves, and hand-stitched dresses. Fashion achieved what diplomacy sought: recognition through quality. That moral thread continues. The very perception of Japanese products today, precise, thoughtful, meticulous, was dyed into global consciousness by post-war cloth. Yet beyond industry and export lies something subtler. The clothes of the 1950s gave people emotional infrastructure. After years of deprivation, wearing color again was an act of courage. A patterned skirt or a polished shoe signified belonging to a peaceful world. Sociologists later called it visible hope. It is difficult now to imagine how revolutionary optimism could look, but step into any archive photograph from 1956, a group of students laughing under paper umbrellas, their attire a blend of kimono and cardigans, and you can feel renewal radiating like spring. The interplay between tradition and modernity that defined those wardrobes became the aesthetic grammar of modern Japanese life. Architecture, product design, even cuisine later adopted the same language. Simplicity balanced by detail, modest outer form revealing refined interior structure. The 1950s taught creators that beauty could be rational and emotional simultaneously. That progress works best when harmony is its lining. Within homes, generational heritage shifted through clothing rituals. Mothers passed down sewing techniques instead of ideologies. Daughters learned independence one stitch at a time. Many of today's elderly citizens recall their first Western-style dress or suit not just as fabric, but as freedom, proof that comfort and dignity were no longer opposites. Each such memory preserves an invisible museum, more enduring than any exhibit. As the 1960s arrived with its Olympic spotlight, the lessons of the previous decade sustained national poise. Japan stood before cameras in streamlined uniforms and graceful ceremony attire that symbolized competence without arrogance. Viewers abroad saw modern technology enveloped in traditional courtesy, the same aesthetic contrast born in the 1950s when a kimono and a business suit could share the same street with mutual respect. What then does this decade reveal about humanity itself? That we rebuild meaning not only through wars and treaties, but through something as intimate as getting dressed. Clothing is civilization's daily rehearsal of values. In every culture emerging from trauma, the return of style marks the return of self-belief. Japan's 1950s proved how fabric can become philosophy, resilience made wearable. The faces in surviving photographs, factory workers, office clerks, students, brides, elders, are dressed differently, yet all project the same silent triumph. They remind us that fashion, often dismissed as vanity, can be the gentlest tool of healing. Thread by thread, it teaches the oldest lesson recovered after any cataclysm, that beauty, however small, is a necessity. As dusk settles over present-day Tokyo and neon light glances off glass towers, somewhere in a quiet wardrobe hangs a kimono folded beside a blazer. Together they breathe, side by side, like memory itself, proof that a nation's history can live in cotton and silk as eloquently as in stone and steel. The 1950s began in ashes and ended in elegance. And in their woven echoes, Japan taught the world that recovery, above all, is an art of fabric.